So in thinking about what to talk about tonight, I kind of ran into a little bit of a paradox. This time of year in Virginia is just off the scale. The trees are turning, there's that crispness. It's just otherworldly. And people come from all over to like vacation here. We live here. I mean, come on, this is amazing. And at night, if you're in a place where you can actually see the stars, the Milky Way is so clear. I mean, sometimes being alive just is so magical. I mean, it's unfathomable what this is about. So I was thinking, well, what is most important? What is most important? There's so much to talk about in terms of the Dharma. And so there's all this beauty and in this place where we live, in this aliveness. And paradoxically, when I look around this world, my heart breaks. It just repeatedly breaks open. All this stuff with these mass killings. I mean, we've had in this country 1,000 mass killings in the last 3 years. And I didn't know they had a definition. It has to be 4 or more people killed or wounded in a particular event. So they're so regular, we expect them. They don't even make the front page all the time anymore. They're just a daily event, right? I mean, we're starting to get a little bit immune to the effect of them. So, but of course it's all relative, and there are lots of places on this earth where this kind of mayhem does not go on. And there's a lot of places where it's a lot worse. If you were to ask the 60 or 70 million refugees or displaced people, 40% of which are children, if they'd like to take their chances here in America, boy, they'd sign on in a New York second, So, it goes on and on. I mean, and they slaughtered all those peace marchers in Turkey. Come on, peace marchers? Why do what is that about? Our Air Force screwed up and bombed a hospital last week. And at home here, we got the election thing going on. And it seems like if you say cruel or racist things, your ratings go up. What? All that stuff doesn't fit. So this planet, it's an absolute gem of a place to live. But what are we doing to it and each other? What kind of creature are we, really? And of course, on the other hand, there are so many exquisite, compassionate acts that occur every single day. Millions and millions of them. They don't get in the news, and they're not part of the headlines, but they're occurring all the time. And if we thought or stopped for a moment, we could think, oh yeah, I remember this person opened this door, or did this or that, or, people checking on each other, taking care of one another. I mean, we have this unlimited potential as humans. Extraordinary. And we have this unlimited destructive capacity. So the question that I came with, well, how does your spiritual practice interface with all of this? How can it help you? How can it offer you perspective to work with it? How can it support you and support you in feeling deeply this palpable suffering that is all around on this planet and not crush you? Not crush you and still have room for lots of joy, lots of love, lots of awe, for this amazing creation that we landed in. And maybe in a more responsive sense, how can this practice assist you in being a active part in a solution, whatever that might be. So, in thinking about what to talk about, is that topic big enough? Important enough? Yeah, we got about 20 minutes. I think we can just wrap it up, in a nice... So we know that Buddhism tells us just by virtue of being born, there's going to be some suffering in the deal. That's what happens when you're reborn. Wherever you're reborn. In the Buddhist cosmology, very interesting. There's these 31 planes of existence, and the being born on earth is like the middle one. There's all these like hell realms, the hungry ghosts, and you get born as animals and all this stuff. And then there's these heavenly realms where there's still a lifetime. It's just this long lifetime, I don't know, whatever, millions of years or a million years or an eon or whatever that is. And but everything is pleasurable. The conditions are favorable all the time. Except there's still the deal where you get old, you age, you have sickness, you die. It's just over this long thing, and it's like being a Hollywood person, I guess, all the time. You have everything you want, and, so they're very interesting realms. But they still have the same kind of issues. They're just played out a little more. But this earth place, if you land in this earth place, this has like all the elements of heaven and hell right there. And so this is the place where a lot of kind of evolution and gains in consciousness can happen, because we're motivated by the suffering that we see around us and feel in us to kind of work with it in some way. If you get born in a heaven realm, it's like, it all feels good, just go with it. And then you're still dealing with loss, betrayal, lamentation, all the things. And if you're born into a hell realm, you can't get it together to practice and get very far. Although I think my dog is doing a great job. She's just, her next shot is either she's going to vault to a heaven realm, or maybe she'll get a shot as a human. But, so here we are. We also get a lot of joy here. The 1,000 joys and 1,000 sorrows. It's not a total hell realm, although it seems like it might be for certain people who get born in certain situations. And it's really, really challenging. And there's millions of them, if not a billion of them, that suffer way more, than the kind of balance that we have here somehow with our fortunate births. So this business of suffering, I can remember over the years of practice kind of dropping into deeper understandings of suffering over time. And I can remember one time being in a retreat up in the Forest Refuge at the Insight Meditation Society. It was a 2-month retreat, and I guess I was in a couple weeks, 3 weeks or something like that, practicing as intensely as I could. And I ended up with an impacted tooth, one of the big molars in the back. And so I had to do something about it, and they had a dentist that they sent me to, and he said, well, we're going to have to pull it out. And he tried to pull it out, and it broke in there, and then they had to kind of dig it out. So it was a little bit of oral surgery. So I get back that evening, back in my room, and I thought, well, I'll just do an experiment. I won't take any painkillers, and I'll see about working with these sensations during the night. And so as the Novocaine and everything wore off, the sensations got more and more strong, interesting, throbbing, burning, tearing, whatever the sensations were. And so as an experiment, and I knew, I had the pain pills there, I could gobble them down anytime I wanted to, but And I noticed that if I had strong resistance to those sensations, then I was suffering more. If my resistance was low and there was a certain amount of equanimity and there was just the kind of spikes and the valleys of those sensations, if the equanimity remained strong, the resistance low, it was just sensations with peaks and valleys. Unpleasant, but sensations. Whereas it was very clear that when I started the internal struggle, trying to not allow those sensations, it just exacerbated the whole situation. So, I mean, it's the basic kind of thing that's taught in a mindfulness-based chronic pain clinic now in all the hospitals in our country. That's kind of what people learn to do. They work with their resistance, they work with developing their equanimity. But on a broader scale that night, I took a look at suffering both for myself and everybody that I knew in the world. Now, I excluded people I didn't know well, like those people that live in the heaven realm. I don't really know George Clooney or Lady Gaga or people like this. They seem like everything is like, perfect, you know, but I know it's not. If I got to know them, they got all the same stuff. So I took my time because I couldn't sleep. And I thought about each person that I knew well enough. All the manner of suffering that they experienced. You know, some it was around physical issues, chronic diseases, deteriorating conditions, you know, of one sort or another. Some were working with relational stress, maybe in their primary relationship, and they're really in a difficult spot and working really hard and trying to understand it, trying to understand themselves, and you know, the baggage of two people when they come together and try to be together. You know. Some were worried about their children. Some of my friends were worried about their children. Some were worried about issues with their career. You know, maybe some stress with coworkers, etc. Others had real economic fears, you know, about the future, concerns. What am I going to do in retirement? How am I going to put these kids through college? What's going on? You know, how is this going to all work? And some had continuing grief for a terrible loss of a child or a spouse. You know. Others were suffering after a divorce. You know, so this suffering comes in all these different flavors, and we all have our blend, you know. But what came to me was that everyone I knew, that some conditions in their life were challenging. Nobody was spared. Nobody. I couldn't find one person. And I spent hours because I couldn't sleep. And maybe some of you came across my purview, those of you that I know a little bit. So the Buddha nailed it. Bingo. Okay, there is suffering. He also taught there's a cause of suffering. That cause is that kind of grasping, craving, clinging that exacerbates all the basic slings and arrows that we get by being born. You know, it's like with my tooth. You know, if I could allow it to kind of play through without resistance, I wasn't exacerbating the situation. But when I was fighting, trying to make it be something it wasn't, it was more difficult. And on the large scope, fighting against old age, sickness, death, you know, there's a way of grace to navigate that, and then there's a way of struggle and difficulty. And none of us are perfect at it. And we have our moments of equanimity and allowing, and then we have our moments of fear, contraction, etc. But a spiritual practice, we at least have the intention. And we may not be able to exercise that intention 100%. But it's our intention. We know the flow of nature. We're working with that. This is the way it works. Nobody's outside it. So this core unsatisfactory of wanting things to be different, or wanting things we don't have, or not wanting things we do have, and we're thrashing around to get rid of them. Neither of those induces peace. And when we're agitated, it's hard to access wisdom. It's hard to access our natural compassion. So the Buddha also taught that there's an end to this suffering. Look, this doesn't have to go on. That there's a way out of suffering and into lots of joy, happiness, and peace. And that there actually, he said, well, there's this ancient proven path to this. He kind of uncovered an old path, but that had existed and now has been played out for the last 2,500 years, and people practicing it and getting various benefits. So the path has come to be called the Eightfold Path. But you can really perceive of it of having 3 areas of training, really. And the first area has to do with personal integrity, working on our personal integrity. Second area has to do with mental training, meditation, stuff like that. And the third area has to do with wisdom. So we're entering a cycle. And one of my favorite metaphors is, well, we know what a vicious cycle is, where we think, say, or do something that creates an issue, contention, disharmony in some way, and then we get even tighter, and then whatever we say makes it worse, and then it gets worse, and so that's a vicious cycle. So a bona fide spiritual practice that's worthy takes us in the other direction, where we pay attention to our personal integrity. How are we harming others, ourselves? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to kind of work with that? And then we do the mental training. We do these practices that invoke a deep tranquility, a peacefulness, a calm, so that we then can access our natural wisdom and compassion. And we can see more clearly and make more appropriate, wise, and compassionate decisions. So that goes round and round. So I want to look a little deeper into the personal integrity piece and each of the pieces. A couple of years ago, we had a class where we studied the precepts. And we often use these precepts in beginning retreats. So we developed it during this class together, and we borrowed heavily from Thich Nhat Hanh. But I wanted to read them to you. Some of you have heard them. And I reflect on them quite often and for periods of time every morning. They're meant for deep reflection, kind of an everyday repetitive exploration, really for a lifetime. So the first one, aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I vow to cultivate compassion and learn the ways of protecting the lives of people, animals, and plants. There's a really broad reflection on how that plays out. It's nuanced. It's not simply do or don't. Second, aware of the suffering caused by exploitation, social injustice, stealing, and oppression, I vow to cultivate loving kindness and learn ways to work for the well-being of people, animals, and plants. I am determined not to steal and not to possess anything that should belong to others. That's a broad exploration. What belongs to all of us? What belongs just to me? What belongs just to you? Third, aware of the suffering caused by sexual misconduct. I vow to cultivate my responsibility for my own sexual energies and actions and learn ways to protect the safety and integrity of individuals, couples, families, and society. Whoa, the whole sexual landscape, how much harm and damage is done there, you know? Fourth, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful speech and the inability to listen to the suffering of others. I vow to cultivate loving speech and deep listening. The power of speech. I mean, countries go to war over words. You know? Fifth, aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption. I vow to cultivate good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. A whole nother area of reflection, consumption. So you can see that that those are a contemplation on non-harming, on compassion, a contemplation on compassion. And compassion, the description I always like to use, is the quivering of the heart in response to suffering, mine or somebody else's. You know. So, in the Buddhist classic path, this area of personal integrity, they have three elements to it. Right speech, right livelihood, and right action. And you can see, if we got into each of those, how that it all has to do with our relationships with each other and our environment. You know. So that's the personal integrity piece. It's actually critical to a spiritual practice. And so this compassion is a verb. It's an activity. It's when it's moving in us, we want to do something to alleviate the suffering of ourselves or others in some fashion. And one way to look at it, that these compassionate acts, they could kind of be in three categories. You know, if we see wrongs being committed, as best as we can determine what this is harmful, whether it has to do with exploitation of one group or another, racism, degradation of the environment as we see it, whatever the flavor, we can try to stop it. So that a compassionate action can be just, I'm going to try to stop the harming. I don't really know what else to do, but I'm going to try to stop it. You know? And when we see and investigate maybe institutionalized systems in terms of, are they serving the common good as best as they're able, you know, best possible, we can then act creatively to create alternatives. You know, healthy alternatives. And whether it's new energy systems or creating ways to use wastewater and make it usable again. Some resourceful ways of delivering services that we all need as a community. So the second action, compassion action, you say, well, create alternatives. Do something creative and kind of look at a system and improve it in a way. And thirdly, we can find ways to affect consciousness change. And of course, we always start at home, you know, looking at ourselves, working our own kind of personal integrity, training our mind so that it can be tranquil, so that we can see clearly and act wisely and compassionately, you know. And then we can help others to see more clearly. You know, maybe support organizations that are doing that. Maybe teaching or becoming a mentor for someone. So the third action is kind of an educational function in a way, raising consciousness as we see fit. So we can be called in various ways. Now, back to our 3 ways of practice. This mental training that we do, classically in Buddhism, also has 3 areas to it. It has what's known as right effort. You have to have some effort. And there's an appropriate effort and a reflection on that. Too much striving creates tightness. Too little, you're just too loosey-goosey to make any kind of headway. There's right mindfulness, which is having to do with kind of bringing presence to this moment to the best of our ability and increasing that capacity to be with what is as it's actually happening, feeling our emotions, feeling what's happening externally. And then there is what's known as right samadhi or right concentration. And that is building the power of this heart and mind so that when we ask it to stay on a particular reflection or contemplation, that it will more and more of the time. So we're training that power, basically. We're creating a power for wisdom and compassion, in a way, when we train our hearts and our minds through this mental training. So, we're into the world of mindfulness now, and in many quarters, there's this access to mindfulness that unfortunately doesn't include the responsibilities of personal integrity, the reflection there. And I love the fact that there's this wildfire of interest in mindfulness. I would like to see and encourage a little more reflection and wedding of the personal integrity piece of practice with it. And there's nothing wrong at all, and it's wonderful people are reducing their stress, etc. But if an individual wants deep change and transformation, it doesn't happen without personal integrity. And from my own teaching experience and working with certain individuals that I knew enough about, that their personal integrity needed a lot of attention and they weren't paying attention there, they never really got very far in their meditation. It just didn't happen. They got maybe a little stress reduction, but they never really, And others, when in a teacher-student relationship and confronted in that way, those that elected to pay attention in that area, then would start to make more progress. So they really go together. So that's my wish for the future in the mindfulness world, that we're in now. So training this heart and mind, creating this confidence and this strength to be with whatever it is that's arising around us, you become an individual that's just more and more fit to work with the stuff that's happening in this world. We need more and more people that can keep their calm, see clearly, and make wise decisions. It's kind of our responsibility as citizens, to the extent that we can. These are the kind of citizens we need. So the third area is the wisdom factors. These insights that arise. And classically, there's wise understanding or wise view and wise or right intention. And all of you have that, or you wouldn't have begun. You have to have enough of a perspective to say, there's some practices out there that might be really beneficial to me, the people around me, this world. I'm going to check them out. That's a perspective. And the intention is the kind of juice. It's like, I'm actually going to get off my tush and, read something or go sit a retreat or something. And so that wisdom and that intention factors, they're kind of like the beginning of the path and they're the end of the path. Because as we get deeper in our meditation, in our tranquility, and our ability to see more clearly, insights organically arise. Insights about our personal lives, insights about the big picture, insights about maybe who to vote for next year or whatever, you know? So that's the, you know, and the insights are so varied. And one of the insights that we don't often talk about is a humility. It's like, a realization that no matter how much information I have, I don't have the whole picture. I don't understand it. I can get up on my righteous high horse and say, well, this is what's needed for the future. And these people are bad and these people are good. But do I really have the longest view? You know? I mean, we have to make decisions. And so we pull it together the best we can and we make a decision. But there's a wisdom that pulls us out of condemning this group or that group because we don't have all the information, even though we think we do from time to time. You know, I had my background early on involved with radical groups. Well, one thing about radical groups, both left and right, they feel it's important to kind of exacerbate the suffering, so more people pay attention and more people get involved, and then some big changes can happen that they feel are necessary. Well, heck, the American Revolution was founded that way. This is what these people did. There was a group of people saying, no, we got to have slower change, and we can work with the British. We can work it out. They were known as Tories. A lot of them had to go to Canada after the revolution. And then there were those who saying, hell, we're going to risk it all. Put it all out there and just go for it. You know? So we kind of think kindly about that group. You know? But what do we know? You know, a group like the Tea Party, they have a certain set of beliefs, and they say, well, we need to shut the government down periodically and kind of throw cold water on all this and get this right. Well, we may have strong beliefs. Those people are crazy, or these people are crazy, or there were people, you know. But what do we really know for the long range? Can we really know? And ideas that we think now are just wrong, might they turn out to be wiser ideas in the future? We don't know. So there's this humility. Doesn't mean that we don't make our decisions and act accordingly and change what we think needs to be changed and act in a certain way. But there's a kind of knowing like, you know, this is my best guess. It's like I was sitting with this Burmese great teacher, Ulakana was his name. He died recently. And he'd been teaching for like 60 years. He was in his 80s. So I'm a kind of new teacher, and I'm sitting in a retreat with him, and we're having a chat. And I'm saying, well, how do you know what to prescribe for a student who comes to you? You know, you've got lots of experience. What are your guidelines? How do you know? And he goes, I don't know. I just make my best guess. You have to be a Buddha to know exactly what's going on inside somebody, to give them and offer them the right support and practice. He says, I make mistakes, but I'm trying all the time to understand and feel and have my heart open and, you know, be there with that person and offer what I can. But he said, I'm under no illusion that I know exactly what's appropriate. I thought, okay. That kind of lets us all off the hook. You know. So I've gone on a little too far here. So the key, of course, is practice. You know, create this instrument, this human instrument, to its fullest. So it can be wise, and that the heart can stay open even in difficult situations. And we can cultivate those strengths. And it's needed. It's so needed in this world. And that's how this practice dovetails with all the suffering that we see. So, practice and more practice. So thank you for your attention. Enjoy the playoffs and the election cycle.